Jody Summers is the brand, and I've marketed a bunch of things. And what I've learned with book marketing is not like marketing a product. It's more like introducing a new movie star. And so it's all about the exposure more than about what you're doing to get somebody to buy your widget, you know? And that perplexed me for a while until I got it through my head that I need to take actions that generate more exposure to the public, whatever that is. And eventually you're going to reach a critical mass, but it's taken me forever to figure out that any one of those steps by itself, email campaign, social media marketing, advertising, none of them work by themselves. You've got to be doing them all in a concerted effort.
We're on, and it is another episode of Over a Pint, the most popular business podcast in Milwaukee. We focus on the world of marketing, and we tell it through the eyes of industry veterans, and that includes our guests. Not a lot of theory when we want to talk about real-world practical experience. Joining me, as always, Mr. Kurt Lingle, Vice President of Celtic Advertising. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic, Pat.
Awesome. You got me, Pat McGovern, Director of New Business at Acedia, also here in Milwaukee. Kurt, we're taking a little bit of a different path today. You know, usually we have hardcore marketing people, business people. I don't want to say that Jody's not a hardcore business, but he's just it's a little bit different. We're talking to Jody Summers. Jody's got a crazy background story. I mean, I'm going to skim over it because I want Jody to tell it. But he's been in the restaurant business. He's owned tanning salons. He's been a freaking stuntman. I mean, how many stuntmen do you ever? I've never met any stuntmen.
I don't think I have. This is the first, Pat. This is the first.
It's awesome. He's practiced martial arts for over 25 years. You're a gymnast. I see the connection in some of this because it really leads me to what you're doing. And you're the author of the popular series, Art of the Dead. We're interested and excited to have you on the show. Jody Summers, welcome to Over a Pint.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. This is a fun experience.
Well, we hope it's fun. We hope it's fun for you.
Well, it's already fun just figuring out how.
We'll have fun. It's the adventure.
We do a little thing here. It's called Over a Pint for a reason. Kurt Lingle, what do you got today?
Duty calls. You know, I have to do this as part of Over a Pint. But, you know, usually I go local with a craft, but I got to tell you, it's been a while since I've had one of these. Product of Scotland. It's a Tennent's. Have not had one of these in a long time. So straight from Scotland, Tennent's. Great to have you on, Jody.
What kind of beer is that? It's
like a lager. It is
okay.
A lager, not like a lager. It is a lager.
Okay.
It's tasty.
All right. I am going to continue to drink these, Mr. Lingle, until A, the case of beer I have runs out, or 2, they give us a sponsorship, and it's from Surly Brewing. This is their sour. It's Black Cherry Supreme. Jody, I don't know if you like the sour beers at all.
Not too much.
If you ever want to try one, the Surly company makes some damn good sours.
Pat, I think the checks should be in the mail soon.
Right?
I think they are. They should be a sponsor. You guys are promoting them every week.
Yeah. Jesus, can you throw us a little something, Surly? Jody, I know you don't have anything in front of you, but if you were going to have something today, what would it be?
You know, years and years ago when I was doing a job in the oil and gas business up in Pennsylvania, I ran across a beer I'd never seen before. It's called Yingling. Yeah. And at the time, it was only on the East Coast. And in the last 6 or 8 months, it's hit the Midwest and Texas heavy. And so I would be a Yingling. I'd be having it.
That's an excellent call. That's one of my favorites.
It's a good beer. I had one of those recently. Yeah.
Jody, welcome to the pod. Let's just dive in. And if you could, Jody, could you give us in the audience a little bit of background about you? I mean, you got a crazy, interesting story, but lay the groundwork for us, will you, please?
Long story. Depending on how much I should edit. I like to tell everybody that there's nothing in my life that fits on a short form. And when you're dealing with any kind of government or, you know, big corporate agency, it's quite annoying because they'll say, what's your occupation? Well, when? And they say, or where are you from? And I, well, originally or lately, because I've I've lived quite a few places. But from the time I was a young teenager, I got involved in gymnastics. I went from swimming to diving into gymnastics, and then found a passion with gymnastics, and actually was hoping to go to the Olympics. Ended up going to college on a gymnastics scholarship.
Amazing.
As it turns out, I was never going to go to the Olympics because 1980 wouldn't have been ready. 1984 would have been too late. Or is it no, I think it was 80. It was 76 I wouldn't have been ready. 84 I'd have been too late. 1980 was the one I could have gone to, and we boycotted it. So I was never going to go, but it drove me, it propelled me through my life. And I was being an adrenaline junkie. It probably saved my life more than one time, just being able to be a gymnast.
Awesome.
But my dad co-founded a restaurant chain down in Texas. And so when I got out of college, my degree was in psychology, and it was an accident. My counselor asked me before my senior year, he said, well, you need to declare a major. I said, really? Do you have any ideas? And he said, well, you got 60 hours in psychology. And you've already got enough hours for a minor in English. And I said, such a deal, I'll do it. So that's how I ended up with my degree, and then went to work in the restaurant business for my dad, and eventually had a few franchises myself. But it's a 24-hour restaurant business. It was kind of like a Denny's or something, but the food's better. Should I say it on the radio?
Yeah.
But that's something I wouldn't recommend to my worst enemy. A 24-hour restaurant business is like having an infant that never grows up. You can't ever leave it, So
I can't imagine. Yeah. I'm sorry. Keep going.
And so but I've kind of got an entrepreneurial spirit, apparently. And I went from thing to thing. I ended up having tanning salons, and I actually had a patent in the pet product industry for an indicating cat litter that would turn colors to indicate urinary tract infections. And I got to a point where it was succeeding, but I needed to do some major advertising. And after actually building the manufacturing and building the labeling and doing the packaging, I didn't have money left to do the kind of advertising I needed. So I licensed the thing out. And my contract manufacturer failed to produce the product, and it created my licensee, and ended up having the patent to try to sell. And then the patent law firm I had messed up my patent, and it expired because they didn't pay the maintenance fees. So, I mean, it's been from one experience to another. Tanning salons I've done. I've brokered computer memory. I've sold security systems to the general aviation industry because I'm a pilot and I love to fly. But you're going to ask me pretty quick how I ended up writing a novel. And that too was kind of an accident. I'm a real avid reader, and I went on an internet date with a lady in California when I was out in California to meet my birth father for the first time. I had some extra time, and I called her up and met her for a drink. Well, she was a retired model and was doing these paintings with the ashes of the deceased that I write about in my book.
Right.
And about a month after that, I was telling another friend about it, and they said, what an icky profession, but what a great idea for a novel. And I just gasped, because I knew I'd never read anything like that before. And the next night I started writing, and 6 months later I had the first draft of my first book and figured out, oh, I'm not so bad at this. And I really enjoyed it. So I just kind of kept going with
it. Kurt, I'm looking at you and I got the same look. It's like, where do you unpack this? Right. I mean, this is like a 4-hour interview, how, right?
Well, I'm gonna jump right in because I'm listening to Jody's, and we were joking a little earlier. It's not just the destination; it's the adventure, right? In life, sometimes when it's a road trip, it's not always where you're going, the final destination, but how you got there and all the adventures along the way. So, Jody, let's just get right to it. So, obviously, you've had quite the adventure in your career and in life, all the different experiences, perspectives. As I had a chance, I was reading some of your posts, and obviously you talk a little bit about, research and really understanding. It's all about the details. If you're going to write something about something, understand the details. Let's just talk about this. Your perspective, all of these different experiences. I mean, is it any surprise that this is kind of pushed you in this direction? Because that had to have been such a benefit to your creativity, whether you realize or not. I'm just, what do you say?
Well, in retrospect, you're right. Didn't think about it in the beginning. But there's a lot of research I did not have to do because of my varied experiences. The opening setting of my first novel is in New Orleans, and I was born in New Orleans, and I know the French Quarter like the back of my hand. So I just had to draw from images, from my memory. But when I got into some other of my novels, like the Mayan Legacy, I used an experience in the beginning, a near-death experience. I racked my brain for months to come up with a near-death experience until I hit myself on the forehead one morning and said, "Well, you idiot, I've had one." And the experience was I got yanked out of a boat by another boat and drug underwater for 100 yards with a parachute line wrapped around my neck. And that was the first chapter of my book, The Mayan Legacy. And from there, a lot of it, the research I had to do for that was into the Mayan calendar and what it actually meant and what could have happened that we didn't really know about at the time. But that character in Mayan Legacy is an adrenaline junkie. Then he's a skydiver and he's a pilot. And of course, I didn't have to research for those things. So certainly my experiences have made a lot of difference and made it a lot easier to have books flow. So
Jody, we're going to just kind of flip flop around here a little bit. So let's just stick with the writing thing because I mean, you've got so many things, but let's just stick with the writing for a moment. So just describe for us. So you got started by, you meet this woman, she does this kind of artistic practice. Someone says, "Hey, that would be a cool story. I've never heard anything like that." All of a sudden you decide to sit down, and 6 months later, you've got a book.
Yeah. I mean, that was the beginning of the learning curve, but yes, I had to learn about editing. And at the time I wrote this, because I wrote my first novel about 15 years ago when ebooks weren't, as popular as they are now. They're fairly new.
Yeah.
And so I did the whole query letter thing, to an agent trying to get representation. I did a couple hundred of those until I got a rejection from a New York agent on a book I did not send her. And I decided at that point that I was probably wasting my time. I had discussed with the lady that I was writing the sequel to what at that time was called Dark Canvas and is now A Brush with Death. I was writing the sequel, and she rejected the sequel that I never sent her. So I knew she'd never read anything, and I decided I was going to self-publish at that point.
Gotcha. So explain like kind of a little bit about that, Jody. So you've got a book done. Well, it sounds like two of them right now.
Three now.
Three. Well, but at that point, and you're trying to kind of break into the publishing space.
Yes.
Right. You're sending out the query letters. It's kind of nothing's happening. You decide, screw it, I'm just going to go self-publish. This is a while ago now. What happens in that self-publishing world? Like what was that like, and what did you do?
Well, back then, I mean, I made every mistake you could make. There was a lot of vanity presses that back then that would take your money to, publish your book. And it wasn't until sometime later that I figured out, well, I could do this, and now you've got Create Space and you've got everywhere where you can publish your own book in a matter of days.
Yeah.
But you end up having to learn the pieces and parts that you didn't know you had to know. Where do you get a UPC code? How do you do a barcode? Who's gonna do your cover? Who's gonna do the any kind of distribution? Who's gonna format the text? This one thing after another you have to learn, and you learn it a little at a time.
Right.
And on top, and after that, you start thinking about, well, I got to market this too somehow. And that too has been a learning curve. I think I've had a few successes, but it seems like a lot of my path over the years has been a trail of what not to do. And you've got to, if back when it was new, self-publishing was brand new, you kind of had to try what you had to try, and find out what works and what doesn't work. But it's been an interesting trip the whole time. My problem is I really want to write the books more than I want to market them.
Sure. Sure.
But I'd like it also not to be a hobby. I'd like to make a living at it too. So,
Right. Jody, if you wouldn't mind, if you could sum up the Art of the Dead series, would you? Like, what's that about? So give people who are listening, like, hey, if you're into this type of thing, right? This is what this is about.
Well, it's a story about Sean and Kira is the one that she's a retired model and an artist that she kind of an artist from her youth that she put away. And then when she retired from modeling, she started painting again, and her mother passed away. And somehow she comes up with the idea one afternoon of mixing her mother's ashes with her paints to do a tribute painting, because she thought it looked just too sterile in an urn on her fireplace, And she started having some strange experiences and memories and thoughts about her mother when she was doing the painting. And she didn't realize till later that she was actually experiencing pieces of her mother's life that she'd never experienced before. And she starts having dreams and visions. And from there, it proceeds. Every time she does a painting, she starts a new business called Canvas of Life, and offers to do these tribute paintings for people. But every time she does them, she experiences pieces or portions of that person's life. And sometimes that's wonderful. Sometimes it's fruitful. And sometimes it's just damn scary. I'll give away one little bit in the first book. She ends up falling in love with Sean, whose father had recently passed away. And he saw a picture of her in an ad, and she's very attractive. So he thought, well, I'm going to have her do a painting. Well, and unbeknownst to him, his father was an uncaught serial killer. And when she started doing paintings of that man, she started experiencing the murders that had never been solved. And so that kind of leads them on the adventure of the first one. And the second book, A Brush with Fire, the FBI calls her up because they've got this crazy arsonist that's burning these houses down, and they haven't been able to get a good clue. And they call her up and ask her if maybe she could do a painting in some of the ashes of one of these houses and get them some clue. And she ends up chasing this maniacal arsonist that has some kind of a psychic connection to her. And it gets worse. The more closer they get, the worse it gets. They end up over in Germany at Dachau. But
Wow.
And then the third one, the general plot is she gets a call from a Hollywood movie star whose wife had recently passed away, and he asked her to do a painting. And when she starts to do it, she finds out that his wife was murdered, and starts getting images of the murderer. And then they get a connection to that guy, and it goes on from there. But that's what the series is about so far.
Excellent. Great. That sounds like a lot of fun. And Jody, so my question for you is, once you get done with the first one, you get done with the first book, did you realize it's like, holy cow, I've got something here? Was your vision when you were writing the first one is like, this is going to be a series? Or did you just want to go, listen, I'm going to take this book as far as I can. I'm going to do what I got to do. I'm going to cross that finish line, and that's it.
Well, I enjoyed writing it so much that before I finished the first one, the idea for the second one had popped into my head.
Oh my gosh. Amazing.
And so I just decided to keep going. And I've got two more plot lines easily in mind I could jump on. I kind of got tired of doing the same characters at that point.
Sure.
So I went to the Mayan Legacy about an adrenaline junkie with a near-death experience. And now I'm about to release a sci-fi novel about a quantum computer robot. That required some research.
So, Jody, talk to us a little bit about your just writing habits. I think this is one of the things I'm very interested in authors. I'm always interested in how they go about things. And I've listened to and read many different authors. Some of them really don't start with any kind of outline. They just kind of freeform it. A lot of authors work from a very, very detailed outline. I think Ken Follett, his outline, by the time he's done with his outline, it's basically the book. I mean, he keeps adding and adding into things. How do you work? How do you go about your process?
I was pleased to find out that my process was a lot more like Dean Koontz, who's one of my heroes. The characters pretty much create the story as they go. When I start writing, I don't know how it's going to end.
Yeah.
And it kind of just flows to me. I'll be driving down the road and have ideas about, I could go that way. Yeah. And the plot just kind of grows in my mind like that. So it's all like planting a bush and watching it grow. I don't know what it's going to look like when it's done, when I start.
Sure.
and I write mostly in the morning. It seems like I'm more creative early in the morning. By the time the analytical side of my brain kicks in, I can't be very creative, you know?
Yeah.
So.
And when you say in the morning, Jody, do you like, is it like, give us a schedule? Are we talking like 8 in the morning till noon? Or how far in the day do you go before it's like, that's it, I'm done?
5 to 7, 2 or 3 hours a day. I just write a few hundred words a day. If I write, you know, I did the math. If I do 500 words a day and I do it every day, that's 15,000 words a month. And that means in about 10 months, I got another novel.
I just want to hold on to that for a minute. It's like, there are so many people, myself kind of included, toyed with the idea of it. It's like, it just looks so daunting. 2 hours, 500 words. You just got to put in the reps, man. And you know why you can do that so well, Jody, though? Let me go back to one of the things I picked up on you. It was like, look, if you've got the discipline to be a gymnast, if you got the discipline to do 25 plus years of martial arts, sit down for a couple hours.
Drop the bucket.
You know, and I'm up in the morning anyway, so I may as well do something constructive, right?
And you know what, Jody, you actually, and you allude to that in one of your blog posts. I was reading a bunch of your posts, your blog posts, and I always like, before we have a guest on, you try to find, like, you know, what are some, how can we connect the dots here a little bit too? Because you're right, Pat, we have guests from everywhere, and that's what I love. I love having different on the show. I think it's fun. But you know what's cool, Jody, when I was just meeting you first, and then hearing you talk, you're very relatable. And there's, you know, inherently there's an organic empathy to you where it's like, there's something for someone to grab. Like, granted, I don't know anything about being a stunt person, but your experiences are so diverse that there's something for someone to kind of connect to. And I was looking or reading one of your posts, and it's very clear, just from a general lesson perspective, we need to write and we need to read more. You know, it's like, just in general, we don't read and we don't write enough. And, you know, you had one of your posts was, you know, why every writer should have a blog. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, you know, I'll take it one step further. It's like, we all should be writing more, because I just think it helps, even if that's not going to be a career. It seems to be almost like, I don't want to say a lost art. I'm not quite sure the word I'm looking for, but I was finding lessons in your posts that are relatable to me and others that I know. I'm like, reading and writing, it's like, it's key really to whatever your calling is.
Well, I agree with you, and I feel like reading and writing are becoming a lost art. They're taking second fiddle to streaming and games. And I learned so much from, I've read everything you can think of. I mean, I've read biographies and autobiographies. I'm a huge fantasy fan. I like thrillers, supernatural. I mean, pick something. From Stephen King to James Patterson to, you know, Donald Trump. I've read just about anything anybody was writing. And I just think that people don't express themselves as well as they did once upon a time when they were reading all the time. Did you ever hear the story about how much diminished our general vocabulary is over what they had around William Shakespeare's time? Oh. A comedian did a whole skit about it. You'll have to look it up. It's called Three Little Pigs in Victorian English. It's funny. But he said back then their average vocabulary was about 75,000 words or something like that. And our current normal vocabulary is probably around 5,000 to 7,000 words. He said, so if you look at it, we weren't even as smart as the children back in the Victorian era when it comes to vocabulary. And I think it's becoming a lost art, you know?
I do too. And you see it, and I appreciate your perspective, and you see it in, you know, we're not going to be, you know, we're not all writers by trade. We don't maybe have that talent, but you see it in how people craft an email. It's, you know, it's based on characters. I also liked, when I was reading your posts, it's like take a book. It's like the checklist, like wallet, check, keys, check, coat, check, book, check. Bring it with you. It's almost, I was gathering from you, it's like wherever you go, make sure there's something under that arm with you. And I'm like, I like the lessons you weave in too, beyond, like I said, that's the stuff I was gravitating and extracting from a lot of your blog posts. I was trying to find some relevance, and there was a lot in there.
You know what what really switched me over to Kindle. I'm a paperback book in my hand kind of guy. I always have been. I love it. But I ended up downloading the Kindle app because I needed to be able to read my Kindle versions of my book on a Kindle app and see how they were formatted. And so I started reading some books on Kindle. And what I've realized is now that I've got Kindle on my phone, my book is always there, always. And how many times in a day do you have a crack of space that you can't use? 15 minutes waiting on the dentist, or 20 minutes waiting to get in line to go do something. You can be reading. And I've read whole novels in the interspaces between things I was trying to do, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was.
Jody, let me, I want to ask you about what kept you going. So you've got these books published, written. You've got these books written. You're sending out query letters to different publishers throughout the country. Nothing's really coming back. How did you decide to just keep going? Like, what kind of drove you to kind of take that next step and look for other options? Talk to us a bit about that.
It was long about that time that I was reading some Lee Iacocca novels, both of his autobiographies. And I really, really enjoyed writing that first book. And about this time I was reading about Lee Iacocca, and his second book is all about retirement. He says, he was talking about all his friends that are multimillionaires that retired and then died because they didn't have any reason to live. And he was basically saying, if you're going to retire, you better have a plan. I don't care how much money you've got. And after writing my first book, I realized I love doing this, and I want to give back to other people the enjoyment that I've gotten from reading over the years. So right. I wanted to stay with it because I love doing it, and I want it to make money for me so I can do it more. You know, I've got right now I'm in the real estate business, and I'm in the oil and gas business, and I'm an author. And the other two businesses support me being an author at this point, you know. So, but I'm going to keep writing like another fantasy author said, I'm going to keep writing till the day they nail my coffin shut, except my daughter tells me that I'm going to be cremated, and at least part of me is going to be in a painting. And I did that to myself. So,
so you decide to make do the self-publishing route. Jody, I know we talked about this a little bit before the show, but talk to us a little bit about what you learned in terms of the marketing of the brand Jody Summers, right? I mean, it's like Ryan Holiday has a very interesting book called Perennial Seller, which he talks about. It's like one half of the coin is writing, creating, but there's that other part too, where you got to be marketing, you got to be pushing yourself out. And that's hard for a lot of people. A lot of people don't want to do it. A lot of people just like, hey, I'm cool with writing. I'm cool with putting in the hours. The marketing thing is a bit of a challenge. Don't like it. But what have you learned? What steps have you taken to get that brand out there?
Well, one of the things I've discovered is that it's going to need to be a multifaceted approach. I've tried one thing and tried another thing, and no one thing seems to be working very well. I've had a few things that went well. You know, a feature ad on BookBub, for instance, sold me a few thousand books in a couple of days. But and it got me to be, I was an Amazon bestseller in 2 categories for a few days, which that's a whole, don't get me started on how you define a bestseller. But I have tried social media people, and you've got to be careful with those these days. I think there's a million scammers saying they'll start throwing out the buzzwords about your SEO and your website and your Facebook, and they'll get it going for you for a mere, pick a number, and nothing ever happens. And you figure out later that they were out of Pakistan, and they were scamming you from the word go, and you can't do anything about it.
Sure.
I hired a fellow to help me. He wrote a book called Selling Fiction on Amazon, a guy by the name of Mike Alvear. I love the guy, and his was a bestseller, and I hired him to help me with my books. And he was really intrigued with the plots. And he did test markets with different ads. We had several different ads he had created, and did test markets on Facebook and test markets on Amazon, and maybe got a better idea of what our audience was supposed to be.
Sure.
But it never seemed to take off like he thought it should. And he said it was baffling him. But I'm beginning to figure out that it's going to be, you need to do some kind of ads. You need some kind of social media marketing. You need some kind of, podcasts, anything, radio interviews, anything to get your presence out there. I've actually tried to get in connection with some producers and directors because I think this would be a great TV series, frankly. And I've gone so far as to stick a copy of my book in the mail to Reese Witherspoon, because I met some people that live on her street on an air flight sometime, and they said, "Oh yeah, we'll give you her address," and so I sent her a book. But you can't really do that because they're very, very scared about if they ever did anything that sounded anything like your book and they'd read your book, you have a chance to sue them. So
Sure.
But I've tried to go that direction and get some producers interested. I've got interest, but I hadn't had anything happen yet. So I'm backing down to finding 5 or 6 different avenues to do it once. Social media being one, podcast being one, targeted marketing being another one. But you got to do more and build up the buzz, because you really do have to have a lot of numbers to get the sales. Yeah. And they're out there to get. You just got to get in front of them.
Yep.
Yep.
Jody, at this point,
actually, Pat, if I could, I gotta stay on this for a second, because this is branding and marketing related. I think there's a tendency a lot of times too with brands they're always after the new user versus building the loyalty with those that already, the customers that love them already. And you wrote something about that. You were talking about how, authors are, it's like, love your fans. Start with those that are already drinking the Kool-Aid. And again, I looked at that. I'm like, that's smart. That's a branding philosophy, in my opinion, a marketing philosophy that's very smart to go after that. So my question is, based on your own advice, which I thought is good, whether it's, Jody is an author or it's a brand that's trying to grow, take care and organically grow. Talk about that a little bit about, as you're building your brand, as you're trying to get that buzz, the ambassadors, fans are ambassadors. What do you do, Jody, to water that love with your current customers, if you will, or those that have been exposed to your brand? Talk about that a little bit, if you could.
Wow, you opened up a whole bunch of topics with that question. You try to drive people to your website and try to gain, email addresses that you can do email campaigns to, and after try to do giveaways when you can. I actually had spent the money to have my first novel made into an audio book, but so it's on Audible, but I haven't done anything to market it, so nobody knows it's out there unless you go to my website and push the button. But I got to get somebody going to my website first, and everybody tells you they can do it, but it doesn't seem. One thing I wanted to address right away, though, is you talk about my brand. Jody Summers is the brand, and I've marketed a bunch of things. And what I've learned with book marketing is not like marketing a product. It's more like introducing a new movie star. And so it's all about the exposure more than about what you're doing to get somebody to buy your widget, and that perplexed me for a while until I got it through my head that I need to take actions that generate more exposure to the public, whatever that is. And eventually you're going to reach a critical mass, but it's taken me forever to figure out that any one of those steps by itself, email campaign, social media marketing, advertising, none of them work by themselves. You've got to be doing them all in a concerted effort. So that's kind of what I've been trying to do. More recently, that's what I've been trying to do.
Right. So, Jody, you have how many books do you have now published?
4.
Okay.
And I've got the 5th one, Aiden QV. I've got the cover done. I got the first draft done. I need to do some editing on it, but that's going to be fun. That's about a quantum computer robot with emotions and what he can do and how he deals with it.
And where did you come up with that? How did you get into that? Where did that story come from?
That's a good question. I don't remember where that one came from. I have stuff pop in my head all the time. I've got a list of plot ideas longer than your arm. If I ever get to them, I should live so long. But I'm always interested in sci-fi, and something, I don't remember what actually triggered me on that one, but.
So, Jody, here's what I'm just listening to you talk. It's like you're spending just about every day, right? Do you do work? I mean, right? Monday or Sunday through Saturday? I mean, every day?
I really try to, and
Okay.
on and off in periods I do. It depends on how much I'm doing the other two jobs I have.
Well, I mean, talk to us a little bit about how you find the balance, Jody. I'm like you're writing, you're doing your book thing, which you love, but you've got a couple other side hustles going on, right? That help support that.
Right.
How do you balance it all?
It's the trick. It feels like a juggling act some days. I think the way I allocate my time has got to do with, honestly, sometimes it's got to do with mood. You feel motivated or have an idea about one facet or the other that you're trying to accomplish, and you go for that one. But I always try to come back and focus on my books, but plot ideas come to me in unusual ways. You know, the oil and gas business has had me traveling all over the country for the past 10 or 12 years. And I can't tell you how many times I'd be driving down the road and see something, and I'm like, oh, that would be interesting. And the next thing, and I've got a little voice recorder on my phone. So while I'm driving from point A to point B, I record the idea down and work on it later. But it's always a interweaving, you know, you're trying to,
Sure.
You always, and the sad part is you always feel like no matter which one you're doing, you feel like you're neglecting the other two, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, forget personal life and physical, you know?
Right.
Well, creativity doesn't always follow a set schedule, as you're saying. You might be, traveling for your other career, and boom, this idea hits you. But I will say, I come back to a lot of things you wrote. You're a big believer in the cracks of time, as you call it. So obviously, I would imagine you're applying that to, not just reading the cracks of time, read during the cracks of time, but probably the things you love, your vocations, whatever it is. It's like you're probably just you're starting to wire yourself differently to think, I just have to apply that philosophy and make it work as best I can.
Yeah, I read that example of some professor that had done that cracks of time thing years and years ago, and I've lived by it, and I'll maintain that I can get more done in less time than most anybody I know, because of that. I don't know if you ever heard the analogy, but Pat, this professor brings in a gallon jar with a bunch of boulders in it, and he asks the class if it's full, and half of them say, yeah, it's full, and then he dumps in a bunch of pebbles, and he says, now is it full? And they say, yeah, it's full, and then he dumps in a bunch of sand. And he said, now is it full? And almost everybody says yes. And he comes in and he dumps a cup of coffee. And he says, no matter how busy your life is, you can always fit in a cup of coffee. And the point is, there's always cracks of time you can fill in if you utilize them. You know, they sit there and they're wasted.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. That.
Jody, one of the things that, from my observation in listening to other authors talk, is that authors it's a pretty tight community. So are you connecting at all with other authors in your area? I mean, is there like a kind of a community of other writers that you associate with and learn from as well?
Most of what I learn from other authors is from books that I read. I don't
Okay.
want to, I'm a very social person by nature. So I don't want this to, and I wanted to preface that because I've actually avoided other author communities, because it seems like every time I was around a group of authors, they get to talking about each other's problems or successes, and it ends up being, it seems to lose the value. You know what I mean? They're more interested in exchanging ideas than actually sitting down and writing, you know?
Yep.
Or trying to figure out how to do something they can't do. I'd rather read about those and, learn from somebody that's already succeeded.
Yeah. I got to ask you this, Jody. You said you're a big reader. Makes sense. If you're a writer, you're going to be a big reader. Give us some of what's on your bookshelf right now? What's next to your bed that you're reading right now and really enjoying?
2 books. I've usually got more than one going. I'm reading a Clive Cussler novel. I love all his series on the one hand, and I just got a book from O'Reilly, his book on Trump that I'm just starting, because that sounded really interesting. So those are the 2 that have been in my library at the moment. The 3 before that were all Dean Koontz books, because he writes a bunch of them in first person, and I'm about to do a first person novel. I wanted to see how he did it.
Well, that's interesting. You mentioned that. When you think about your plot lines and you think about your stories, do you also think about like the type of person, first person versus third person? What's your process like in terms of that?
Again, it's kind of like my whole life. It kind of falls into place. I don't know how to explain it, except when I'm thinking about a book I'm going to write, I'm thinking about it in my head and I realize, oh, this is first person. I haven't done that. I haven't done a first person novel before. How's that different? But I wanted this character to be talking about this book from his own perspective instead of a third person. So I started doing some more research on it. But most of my stuff has been third person because I'm more comfortable with it.
Jody, before we wrap up, this has been fantastic, and we just barely scraped the surface. You've got an amazing background. The writing part is fascinating. I'd love to even talk to you about the restaurant thing because that just seems like that seems equally as crazy to me. But you've got the last word, sir. Like, how do people find out more about you? Be selfish. Talk to them about how they get in touch with you, where they got to go, what books you want them to focus on, anything you want. This is your time to give people all that information.
I appreciate that, Pat. Well, of course, you can go to jodysummersbooks.com, and that's my website, and that'll connect you to all the Instagram and Twitter and everything else is out there, LinkedIn. I recently consolidated my handles on all those social medias, which was something else that I hadn't done. If you want to email me, you can email me at jody@jodysummersbooks.com. And if you want to, if you want to look at what I'm doing, you can check it out on my website. I don't think I've got anything up yet about my newest book, but I need to because the cover is pretty engaging for AIDEN QV. AIDEN, by the way, is an acronym. It stands for Artificial Intelligence via Dynamically Evolving Nanites. This robot's actually got 3 computers in one. He's got a supercomputer, a quantum computer, and these nanites circulating through his body. So it's a confluence of 3 different robots, if you will, working together.
Jody Summers, thank you so much for being on Over a Pint. Cheers.
Cheers. Here's to y'all.
Jody.